you very much. I stand in front of a room, I think, in need of hope. And so I think in the data, there are sources of inspiration. But a couple of years ago, for the first time, we did talk about the fact that in the Reykjavik Index, we could see signs of a backlash. Obviously is going to be the case that that backlash and the data representing it has deepened in the last 2 years. So I don't bring news that you wouldn't expect, but I do think that there are opportunities for us to be positive about some of the things that we see. So just a couple of other thoughts before I move ahead with sharing the data. The Reykjavik Index has been documenting how societies perceive male and female leaders in terms of their suitability for leadership since 2018. And it started with the G7. Since then, we've done other parts of the world, and last year we were able to share data that had been supported by the Nordic Council of Ministers. This year, with the support of Gates, we've also done work in Kenya and Nigeria and India. But for the next 5 minutes, which is all I've got, I'm going to talk about the trends in the G7, not because I think they're globally relevant, but because they are geopolitically specific and serious for everyone in the room. So the US is 25% of the world's economy. So what has just happened there affects us all, but it's not isolated to the US. Populism has been working its way around other countries that we've been tracking. So it's time for us to really get under the skin. So, just before I get into the full Reykjavik Index, this is the data that we've been tracking in all of the countries that we study, where we ask the question, how comfortable do people feel with having a woman as a head of government? And this is the proportion in the research who say they are very comfortable. The research was done in August, between August and September of this year. So Kamala went into it with only 47% of US, when questioned, said they were very comfortable with a woman as a head of government. So she did have one hand tied very firmly behind her back. So back now to the Reykjavik Index overall. So as we know, it is a measure of perceptions of equality for men and women in leadership. Any score of less than 100 is a measure of prejudice. And what the Reykjavik Index does is it actually studies prejudice against women and against men. And that has turned out to be prescient, because I'll share some information today which we're seeing for the first time, which is sort of intensifying regenderization, retraditionalization in some occupations, with some being increasingly female, and increased prejudice against men, and the reverse. So first scores back in 2018, for those of you who were here, we had an overall score of 72, meaning if men and women are on a journey towards equality in the way their leadership is perceived, they're on an equal footing until the 73rd kilometre of a 100-kilometre race, and then they hit a wall. And this has been the picture since. What looked like very small progress and stasis, moving to reversal, and a little bit more reversal this year, which isn't anything you wouldn't expect. And what I'd also add is, with the work that we've done in Kenya and Nigeria, which is going to be reviewed in conversations today, those scores are 52 for Kenya and 57 for Nigeria. And what this shows us across the G7 is there is just a decline everywhere, but with some having slightly more significant falls than others. So in France, in Canada, in Germany, and in the US, those scores have really quite declined. The UK has got a very interesting pattern of going down, but also showing that it can bounce back up again. And really only Italy holding it steady, and perhaps to some extent Japan. The good news comes from Iceland, as always. It still remains the most progressive. So I'm missing something. I'm not.
We're chuckling because we expected Iceland.
Yeah. Oh, okay. But what we can say is, whilst good news comes from Iceland, Iceland is also affected by the same issues as the other countries. And in terms of the re-traditionalization of occupation and gender, it's coming through. So the key theme is this increasing polarization. It's nuanced, but in the nuance, a country can turn one way or the other through the democratic process. So what we've seen before, which is younger people coming through with higher levels of prejudice than their parents, and that happening in all the countries really that we're studying, and then this new thing, which is a regendering of roles in some sectors. So this is what it looks like. So the purple spots are younger people. And that was 2 years ago when we first presented that. It felt like something unbelievable that we could have a generation of young people coming through, less progressive than their parents. And I think now all of the data is triangulating around that to tell us this is something we have to take very seriously. Italy being the interesting difference because they did not have the same degree of progression over the last 20 years as other countries, and so the differences are less stark. And this is the new one. This is what came through and we really had to look at in the data this year. This re-traditionalization at the edges. So when we first started looking at the data back in 2018, the childcare, fashion and beauty, and healthcare was seen as very female industries, and that has intensified. And at the same time, so have the 5 sectors where men are viewed as being most suitable to lead. That masculinity and that feminization of these two different ends of the sector spectrum have really intensified. So to finish, it is nuanced. But what is clear is this continuous polarization driven by opposing forces. And when we start to look at those, we can start to see the opportunities we have to start to rebuild. So if we think, on the one hand, driving polarization and driving populism are the economic shocks that we've had since 2008, and 2008 then leading into the first wave of populism in 2014 across the G7. But at the same time as that was going on, workplace transformation through regulation so that women were beginning to make advancements in the workplace. Populist politics now being a factor in many countries across Europe and in the US for the last decade. But at the same time, women coming through in higher numbers than ever into higher education. That we have misinformation and foreign interference that even a few years ago we weren't quite sure about, and now we're very clear is happening in our democracies. But at the same time, we have an increasing number of visible role models across society in this room. A room like this wouldn't have existed 20 years ago. We have culture wars. But at the same time, we also have a large minority of young people really readdressing gender stereotypes. And we have geopolitics and war, perhaps the most serious of all of this. And at the same time, we have falling birth rates in many continents of the world, changing the role of women. And the consequence of that for their relationships and for men is very significant. And then, very significantly, online targeting of boys and men, which is a continuous, deep theme, all of that accelerated by COVID-19. So that's where I'll end. But I think when we look at these different opposing forces, we can see both the damage and the opportunity. Like all populism, it's a whistleblowing exercise of pointing to a group of people and saying they are to blame. And what has happened is that as women have started to make some progress in some countries, young people have seen their own material circumstances and opportunities really decline. And a populist will associate those two. As women have started to step into leadership, lower income men have seen, even in the US, have seen their real wages fall by 14% over the last 10 years. And a populist will bring those two together. So what our job now is to uncouple feminism being blamed for some of the things that have been happening that have made society much more inequitable and made boys and men more vulnerable, and start to work with our young boys and men as they come through to be on the same side. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Michelle, for clarifying the challenge ahead of us, and certainly for reaffirming, I think, what we can see with our own eyes, our own feelings, and reaffirming data that also comes from the UN and other institutions that are telling us that we're facing a rather large boulder that we're going to have to push up a very a very steep hill if we're going to change the dynamics and increase women's equal social, political, and economic power. It also points to the fact that over the past 50 years, which Hala referenced this morning, that there has been backlash and progress and backlash and progress, and every time the vibes are bad, women are blamed. This is certainly happening right now. But I think we want to talk on our panel about the why and the what next. And I'm so pleased to be here with some experts, influential and inspiring experts to help us work through that. I'm, by the way, the other Michelle. I'm Michelle Milford-Morris from the UN Foundation. So we have a double Michelle power up here, which is great. Which is great. I'm going to start with you, Anne. So Michelle has laid out the kind of bracing environment we're facing. And I'm wondering, from your point of view, what does this context tell us? What does the current context tell us about why this is happening? And what should we be considering?
Yes, well, thank you, Michelle, for presenting this newest research. And it's not surprising, but it is sobering, certainly, and forces us to sit with the uncomfortable reality that progress is not inevitable. I think we know that. I think we have a lot of evidence to show us that. And at the same time, I think your last slide also showed that there are really important contextual factors that we have to pay attention to. We can't accept these statistics as somehow an indication that these attitudes are fixed or that they are inevitable. We've seen through the trends you've shown over the years that attitudes are shaped, they change over time, and they change rapidly. And I think that what the attitudes reflected in the index are showing is that people see a world that is increasingly hostile to women as leaders. I mean, we see it around us all day, every day. It's the reality that women are being demeaned, denigrated, abused, online, offline, in the real world. And so I think that we need to accept the fact that the index is showing us that people are seeing a world that is not suitable for women's leadership, or that is not conducive to women's leadership. Not that women are not capable, and not that we doubt ourselves, or that we should, in fact, be content or complacent with where we are. But we have to really pay attention to the fact that these attitudes are shaped by a very concerted, well-funded, coordinated campaign to demean and denigrate women and other minorities in an effort to consolidate power in the hands of a few. So we can't accept it as fixed. We have to accept that we are against some incredible headwinds, but that these are not fixed or immutable, and that we can and will change these attitudes, and we will move forward and make progress together.
Really important point. The opposition is doing this on purpose. They are disciplined. They are organized. The problem is not the women. The problem is the world. Mm-hmm. So thinking that way, and Amina, in Nigeria, you're confronting these same headwinds, and you have dedicated yourselves to changing perceptions of women's abilities, their leadership, their power. In Nigeria, tell me how you're seeing this context there in light of this research and what we know about what's facing us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'm really delighted, to be here in your midst and to be in Iceland. It's my first time here. Thank you very much for the very warm welcome. And I'm just going to quote what, Hala, the president of Iceland, said yesterday. I don't think anybody gives you power, so we have to take it. And I think that we as women, we've worked in isolation for too long. We all work in silos. I don't think we've been very, very good, especially in Nigeria or in Africa. We haven't been very good at forming those alliances and collaborating and building those partnerships sufficiently so that we can make the kind of impact that we want. Now, in presenting the data and in the comment from the previous panelist, I mean, clearly the economic headwinds have an impact on everything that's going on and put another layer of complexity. But what is interesting is that the thread from the data is really very, very similar. Yes, Nigeria is at the bottom right now, sadly, of the pack. I don't know how many people know enough about Nigeria, but just, spend a few minutes giving a bit of context. we have a population of 230 million people in Nigeria comparative to Iceland that has not even up to 500,000 people, right? We have, and 50% of that population are female. We've never had a female president. We've never had a female vice president. We have 36 states in Nigeria. We've never had a female governor of any state. We've had a few deputy governors. And so that tells you the depth of the challenge, not just in the public service, but in political leadership. And I'm sad to say that we seem to be moving backwards in terms of women in leadership, in the public service and in politics. So just some data points in that regard as well. In the recent election, which was in 2023, the number of women represented in parliament declined from 8% to 5%, okay? In the executive, it also reduced from about 20% to 17%. And the bright light is in the private sector, and we have seen progression there, and that's the domain in which I have operated with my NGO, WISCA, Women in Successful Careers, in collaboration with UN Women, and in collaboration now, I'm pleased to say, with the Gates Foundation, which is why I'm sitting here today. So a shout out to the Gates Foundation and also to Reykjavik Forum for inviting me. So in the private sector, we see progress, and the greatest progress has actually been seen in the financial services industry. And why? Because of a policy by the regulatory body, central bank, that said that, that imposed what they call the sustainable banking principles, and insisted that in all financial institutions there should be 40% representation. And that had a catalytic effect. And today, just because of that singular advisory policy, it wasn't even a law, right? Advisory policy, we're now seeing many women, female CEOs in banks, and also female chairpersons in banks. And they have held their own. They are performing, and they are transforming those organizations and contributing to the bottom line. And that has had some sort of contagion effect. We've also seen some movement also in the telecom sector and in other private sector domains. But the real challenge is really, sadly, that women and girls in Nigeria continue to fare significantly worse than men in almost every other sphere of social and political life. And that really needs to change. The question is how. You asked, what can we do differently? Well, I think, the economic headwinds also are a challenge. The men, there's definitely a belief system in Nigeria that men are the natural leaders. And these issues have cultural connotations. They have the social norms and the socialization over time, such that even the women themselves have begun to believe it and have what we call the imposter syndrome. Even when you're capable sometimes, right, you don't want to put your hand up, you don't want to step forward, you don't think you can do it. And that is coupled with another syndrome which we have in Nigeria, which is that it doesn't matter really how many degrees that you have. I mean, I'm a lawyer, I have an LLM, I have a master's, I have an MBA, I have all kinds of certifications. But if I don't have what they call MRS, right? I don't know whether you understand that here.
Yes.
Means Mrs. Then, I've not accomplished anything. And even if I acquire the MRS, and that gives me, in quotes, some form of respect, if I don't have children, I have not performed my role as a woman, right? So we have very serious issues, and in that regard. So you find that many women who could easily get to the stage where they're in mid-career and they're approaching the age of 35, they're looking at the biological clock and it's like, okay, I'm going to be 40 very soon. I think I need this job is too busy. I don't think I'm not going to have time to, socialize and meet a partner. Therefore, I think I'm going to either change jobs, that would change my job so it gives me more flexibility, or actually I'm going to leave the workforce so that I can have time to do these things. And that's the kind of thing that we are working on in WISCA, trying to intervene, to provide the support system, to let women know that you can have it all, because I'm married and I have 3 children and I have a very supportive husband, and also to educate them that it's very important the kind of partner that you select. We met the first man yesterday, and it was such an inspiration.
Yeah.
They were such a power couple, both of them, the president and her husband, and they really gave me personally a booster shot. And I think that we want to see more of that. And one of the other things that I think we need to see a lot more of is, and focus more on, is this concept of role modeling and mentorship, which I think, I don't think, enough attention is paid to. The men do it naturally. They have the old boys clubs, they have their social clubs, and a lot of the decisions, not just in politics, but also in private sector, are actually taken during those informal social gatherings where we, the women, are absent doing the chores, at home. I'll just stop there so I don't take too much time.
Well, Mina, grateful that you're in Nigeria and you're doing this work. Also, you're amplifying the theme of men who've married really well, I think. So appreciate that so much. And I like the idea of women running banks a lot. Michelle, you've been living with this research for years, and I wonder, what are we missing? Where are there opportunities to change knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors that we are potentially missing?
I think we missed what was happening with our young people, and especially during COVID, 2 years, where I think we saw some of these changes come through because they were targeted so aggressively and we weren't there in the places where this was going on. So when I think just in a British capacity, it leaves me with fury that a generation of young people are getting targeted by populist nonsense rhetoric that is turning into a real change in attitudes and culture. So we need to get back in there and turn that around and protect the next generation coming through now, because this would be the first time since we've just talked about the 1930s, but this would be the first time since the Second World War that young people have been less progressive than their parents. So this is enormous, and we need to get back in there and totally re-energize our focus on bringing young people through to understand that things are very difficult for them, but that isn't because women left the domestic sphere. And break that connection that populists have done a very successful job in cementing in their minds, to break that open.
Yeah, that's right. They're exploiting that on purpose. So a special call to parents of very young children, in fact.
And all of us, right? Yeah. So we all parent in one way or another. It's not just down to the parents, but everybody who is working in a professional or community environment with young people. We need to break that correlation, that myth that they've been sold, that because women are doing this, you guys have have a weaker future.
A moral panic about a past that didn't exist.
Yeah,
exactly. And I'm going to leave you with the last and very impossible question, but I know you can handle it, which is like, what next? What do we do?
What do we
do here?
Yeah. Well, I think, the good news is we actually do know a lot about what works to advance women in leadership. Amina pointed to a lot of solutions that we know about. Quotas can work. Addressing the care burden that women face through public policy as well as voluntary corporate policy, addressing harassment and discrimination, ensuring that working conditions are fair and equal, that women are paid equitably and compensated equitably. So there's a lot that we know, and we can't get rid of that, because to be honest, we haven't really done it. I mean, we've talked about it. Our research at ICRW shows how important it is and how it works in different places, but we haven't scaled up those solutions to the extent that they need to be, to say that, we've tried all that, we're done. We have not. That's and to your point, Michelle, I do absolutely agree that we need new messages, and we need different ways of talking about why gender equality matters and why it benefits all of us. And that's where I think we have some, we have to get creative. We kind of have to get together and go back to the drawing board and not assume that the same old strategies and messages are going to work. So I don't have all the answers on what exactly that needs to look like, but I do know we can't give up. And I do certainly know that we have more collective power, look around this room, than we ever have. So we need to use it, and we need to get smarter, more creative, and more determined than we ever have been.
Let's end it there, because that is the perfect rallying call, I think. And I hope you'll all join me in thanking this outstanding panel, Amina, Michelle, and